This is Carnegie Hodges with MasterMine Software, and I'm thrilled to welcome you all here to our quick introduction of MasterMine for QuoteWerks version 9. We are happy to have you here with us today. We'll touch base on the new version 9 features of MasterMine, and then we'll look at the functionality and uses of MasterMine, showing the new features along the way. So now, without further ado, let me introduce our presenter for today's webinar, the president of MasterMine, Rob Macalack. Take it away, Rob.
Thank you very much, Carnegie. So as Carnegie just mentioned, we're thrilled to be able to show you MasterMine in its latest version here this morning. My aim here is to sort of quickly introduce MasterMine and get into the new features, as Carnegie said, but also just kind of give you a quick walkthrough on MasterMine itself. So let's proceed on through. So quick overview of what MasterMine for QuoteWerks is, of course. It is a way of essentially getting QuoteWerks data into what I call pivoting reports, using pivot tables in Excel to sort of marry the best of those two really great products. QuoteWerks, of course, being a database-based quoting application, and Excel being the sort of what I call lingua franca of databases. That is, it's the place that people who aren't dealing with rows by the millions often encounter database-type information, rows and columns. Of course, it's got the pivoting capability built in, drilling through all sorts of wonderful capabilities that really make it much easier to understand and manipulate data, particularly the data relating to sales, of course, in this case. Quick thing about MasterMine, we have been in the software and service business since 1999. We have a lot of users of our products, MasterMine for Goldmine and MasterMine for QuoteWerks. And really, maybe even more important than the actual current users of those is just the fact that we have a lot of direct experience with companies who have worked with QuoteWerks in all the various different ways that people do, and help them to work through the questions of presenting or analyzing or digging into that data to make it more useful to them in supporting their sales process. So what I really want to do is just introduce what is the point of MasterMine for QuoteWerks. It is basically about being able to get fast answers, to be able to dig into the QuoteWerks data and get something, and if you have experience of working with report writers, or especially the built-in QuoteWerks report writer, but others, this is really a much more effective way of dealing with that as an end user than really anything short of being a very high-level IT kind of user. And essentially, from a sales perspective, we think of QuoteWerks data as being essentially your sales data. It's what's in the pipeline. And being able to have that in a methodical environment where you're following a sales process, but you're actually able to monitor that sales process along the way, is really the most effective way to make use of what you're collecting in terms of information along the way and kind of moving it forward. I call it a visible workflow. It's basically a way of taking QuoteWerks data that tends to be kind of behind the scenes, or which you see document by document, but you don't really have any kind of overview of, and really getting to see how that workflow works. And this last part here is really a kind of a comment on, every organization that works with QuoteWerks has also Excel on the side, and people tend to, and this is true of CRM systems as well, people just tend to use Excel to either to pass around information, to accumulate it, however they want to manage it, and this is a much better way of interacting between Excel and QuoteWerks. So very briefly, that's what I wanted to do, to just sort of introduce MasterMine for QuoteWerks. One last slide here before we go into the actual product, and this is just to kind of give you a quick list of what is new in version 9, and some of this I'm going to demonstrate as we begin, because one of the great things about MasterMine is that it is actually fairly simple and quick in terms of creating reports, and that will give us time to kind of show some of these features. So the biggest thing that I like the best about version 9 is the report creation wizard. We'll show right up here in just a moment. It is a way of kind of being able to walk through that initial step, the sometimes intimidating step of just extracting the basic information that you want to get into your report and thinking about it along the way. What do I need to think about in terms of what I want to see in the future in my reports, and so what components do I need to include so that I will be able to see those things. There are in the newer version some stepped up abilities for report sharing and kind of managing reports that are already created. MasterMine workbooks are Excel workbooks that get shared across the network, of course, between multiple users, and you want to be able to keep those things straight and be able to, of course, recall what you've created in the past so that you can reuse it and manage it along the way. Some nice new security functions, the ability to manage in particular from inside reports, to have a central report writing person who creates reports for others but can sort of lock them down in various ways that kind of limit the individual user's reach while also leaving the report creation person able to manipulate what people can get to. Import-export facilitation because people really love to be able to use Excel as a conduit both into and out of QuoteWerks, and so that's kind of what we're talking about there. We have in the newest version some better handling of custom field labels so that your labels in QuoteWerks, if you customize them, will show up in MasterMine the same way. Some very nice improvements to QuoteWerks Updater so that you can make changes to data in Excel and push the data back into QuoteWerks in an appropriate way. That really makes it doubles the power really of MasterMine as far as a sales management tool. Some new licensing options we'll talk about once we're toward the end, and Excel, the toolbar functions just sort of generally. Okay, so with that, I'm going to switch out of there and go over to QuoteWerks. Let's go ahead and launch MasterMine here. In the launch dialog, we keep track of, QuoteWerks automatically keeps track of every report that you create, but you can save your reports into various subfolders. And these are just Windows folders here that you can navigate in Windows. What you're seeing here inside of MasterMine is a subset of your overall Windows. It's only the ones where you have saved or created a MasterMine report before. There are some nice features here, but the assumption is, in this case, I'm looking at a demo database that just has a C drive here. But if you can imagine fairly easily, this would be a network drive, could be a network map drive as well. And it's easy to create, for example, subfolders for individual users. User X, user Y, and user Z, and you can name them however you do and drag the reports right into their folders and share them, that sort of thing. This is a little bit newer capability in MasterMine, along with certain things like keeping a recently used list. So if I will always have a list right here of the top 10 MasterMine reports that I have used, and that is done by individual user. Likewise, I can also have a favorites list that no matter what my most current one was that I used, I can have a favorites list that allows me to sort of quickly get back to the reports that I use most often. If I'm a sales manager, I'm going to want to have 3 or 4 favorites defined in here, and really making favorites is just a matter of right-clicking in my dialog on one of the reports and add it to the favorites, and that just puts it into that list there. Favorites show up here in bold. Non-favorites are in regular font. So that's just a few things about the report management part. Let's get into some actual reports here so we can look at various ways of using MasterMine. So what I've done here is I've organized my reports here by function. So I've got some for marketing purposes, email list selection. If you've got marketing manager, rather, needs to be able to do some follow-up connection with let's say, people that you quoted in the past but didn't close, and that information isn't contained someplace else like a CRM or it is, but it's mixed around in there, and you really want to do your marketing in part based on where are they in the buying cycle. You can do marketing reports right out of the QuoteWerks data. In this case, I've made a couple of selections of them. I'll just sort of pop one open here by double-clicking on it. And this just sort of gives you an example of, an interactive way that a marketing manager would work with MasterMine in Excel. Bring this up here. So here, what I did was I just created an email list selection report. It refreshed against the QuoteWerks data while it was coming up. So this is actually the current data as of the moment that we opened the report. And if I want to make a mailing list out of, let's say, everybody that we quoted in earlier years but didn't actually close, then what I might want to do is, let's say, turn off the ones where the document was closed, We're really interested in the ones that were abandoned or lost, probably, maybe the opened ones as well. And you can see all I'm doing is sort of honing down on a target set of leads. So once I've got my parameters set, people that we've quoted in the past with certain status, we've quoted them in certain years. A double click gives me my list, email addresses. Now in this case, I probably want to leave off the ones that I don't have an email address for, so it's, again, easy to just turn those off. And there's an email list. And it's in Excel, just the same way that you normally send it up to Constant Contact or however you do your email marketing. This is just one example of a kind of a hands-on way of managing QuoteWerks data and using it, in this case, for marketing purposes, but I'll come back and do a lot more kind of sales examples. The last kind of step with this, of course, is how do I export this out for use in another thing like Constant Contact? Well, as I mentioned before, we do have new functionality in the MasterMine toolbars in Excel here to do things like copy this out to, let's say, a CSV file if we want to. I'm not going to run through all the functionality up here, but just sort of point out there's a good deal of capability here that takes us way beyond just sort of native Excel. It really gives you a lot of interaction with QuoteWerks itself and kind of interaction with the outside world as well. So especially if you are current users of MasterMine for QuoteWerks, really encourage you to get to know these. Of course, as I go in here and do these sort of one-off example reports here, I want you to know that before we get done here, I will go show you kind of a long list of use cases that might be helpful also just in your thinking about how you will turn this capability to your advantage in sales management. So this is the create dialog here, and it's with the wizard turned on. Now you can disable the wizard once you get totally used to this. It's a fairly simple overall dialog, but it's got a lot of different boxes in it. And so what we wanted to do is sort of lead you through part by part what to do. So step one is selecting the primary content of the report. It's going to be documents. It could be at the document level itself. It could be at the line item level. And if you choose line items, you're really going to get line items plus the individual fields from line items plus at the document level as well. So, line items would be analysis of, products that you have quoted by manufacturer, by vendor, what all the things that you can imagine for taking that kind of information. Product inventory pulls from the product inventories that you have set up in QuoteWerks. As you can see, it can read QuoteWerks and figure out these are the product groups that are in QuoteWerks. I won't do an example of those today, but I'll choose line items for now. And we might choose within that subparts. Do we want quotes and orders, quotes and invoices, whatever types of documents you want to do the report. There are, after that, templates, which you can choose from. I'm not going to go into one of those, but there's a fair number of those that kind of give you the ability to just jump right to a solution as far as what those might look like for you. If we want to focus our report not on the document date, but rather on let's say the document due date is another good one. In other words, not when did we create the document, which is the document due date, but when do we anticipate the actual close on the sale to be. That would be typically your due date, or any of quite a few other dates in here. Your MasterMine reports can sort of key on or pivot on whatever dates are relevant to you in the report you're doing. I'll do this by document due date. First date would be what's the earliest data that you want to pull. For those of you who've got hundreds of thousands of quotes in your system, you might want to limit things by time a little bit, so you're only pulling the last couple of years worth of data. Typically, organizations that only produce a few hundred quotes a year or even fewer, you're probably never really going to need to put a date range on here, because inside the report you always have control of what date range you're looking at. And then some other choices here. In particular, you'll want to decide whether the overall report makes sense if you include quotes that have been lost. By default, you don't include those, so that's something to be aware of. But if you're going to be doing close ratio kind of analysis, that sort of thing, you're going to want to include the quotes that actually were put out there but lost. If it's really more of a future-looking report, then you probably don't care about that as much. The fourth and fifth steps here are selecting the specific fields you're going to include in your report. As I mentioned, the newer versions of MasterMine do things like show you the actual custom label on a custom field, so you don't really have to know the underlying field names. You might want to also include other fields, and just checking them on gets them in there. This is every color-coded. This is every field at the document level, which are the green fields, and at the line item level, which are the sort of pinker fields there. What's left after this point is just simply to name your report, line items for demo, and we'll have one final, this one final thing where it says to name the report, and then go ahead and hit finish, and we can go ahead and create now, or I'm just going to show the full dialog right now just so you can see it. Normally you could just hit the create button, it would just dive right in, but I want to just kind of give you this. So what we had was the wizard was covering up parts of the screen, but essentially once you get used to creating MasterMine reports, you find this relatively easy. You just go down that same sequence of parts and choose what you're going to have and hit the OK button, and off it goes and creates your report. So that's sort of a whirlwind tour of the create dialog here, but I just wanted to give you a sense of, it's relatively easy to just sort of point at which part of QuoteWerks data you want to work with, hit the finish button, and right away you'll start seeing that data over on the Excel side. And so when it comes up here in Excel, all right. So in the far background we have QuoteWerks itself, of course, which we will show some interaction with. In the middle background is Excel with our kind of default layout of the MasterMine report that was created, and in the front is the create dialog. I'm actually done with that now, so I'm going to go ahead and close it, and we'll just operate here in Excel, and this is where the fun part begins, of course. So having pivotable data from QuoteWerks allows you, of course, to do many different things. If you're not already familiar with pivot tables and you're not a MasterMine user already, when you buy MasterMine, you actually get some training and some support within your package that helps you to create your initial reports. So don't be intimidated by the pivot table itself. Just be liberated by it, because what it really does is give you some wonderful access to an overall approach to your QuoteWerks data that's sort of overhead or overall, and allows you to understand in a quick way what you've got in your database. So what we're seeing here is, this is just the default layout here, is by document due year. That's the year of the document due dates. Year, month, and then within each year and month, an actual document number from which we can add additional detail, and then a summary of the total of parts and the total of dollars that sale involves. So where we go from here is actually a matter of kind of just having a sense of what it is that you want to accomplish with your report. So for example, if I want to do an analysis of my line items because I want to know of our open quotes, which products and how many of each and what dollar value of each are currently out in quotes. Now that's something that, of course, the sales manager might want to know. They might want to have sales contests based on that information, and maybe even have individual sales reps able to quickly see what they've got, so they can so they know how they're doing on the sales contest, and they can strive to do more of whatever the directed thing is. Essentially, the whole idea is to make it so that you can set up a report like that very easily, but with this pivot table, you actually be able to do it very simply. So, and here's how I'm going to do it. I'm going to drag a field out, and for those of you who are not familiar with pivot tables here, this happens very quickly. You can just kind of follow me along here. I'm dragging a couple fields out just to kind of simplify my view so that I can filter. So first I'm going to filter at the top here. I'm actually going to choose 2018 data here, I think, just because I've got a little more of it to demonstrate with. So in 2018, by month, and I'm interested to know, actually I'm not going to do it by month, I'm going to do it by product, because I want to know which products do we have out there. And so I included on the right-hand side here, and I want to look at this by part number. So I'm just dragging a field in and dropping it. And so that quickly, actually, I have a part number breakout of by quantity and total dollar amount various, and at the moment it's just alphabetical by the part number, so that's maybe not the most useful thing, but I'll further refine it. So for example, I might take this by manufacturer and have each manufacturer's parts broken out this way, and then use this as a filtering mechanism. So if I'm interested really in a certain manufacturer's parts or set of them, then I might just go in and home in on only that one manufacturer. So you see, just step by step, seeing the results of my report right away, so I know exactly what the effect of my changes are. I can sort of step toward the report that I want. So here I have front range parts. Looks like there's several of them that don't actually have a part number in them, so that might be something in my data that I want to fix. I'm going to get to that here in a moment. But it gives me part by part. Here's the total things that we have out in quotes. Now, I didn't choose a certain document status. You might want to do that. Say, well, let's just look at the ones that are open, or let's look at the ones that are closed or open but not lost or abandoned. Active quotes that are out there. Here in the report, I have the ability to filter on anything, to display pretty much anything that's in QuoteWerks. Since you followed me here, since we created this report from scratch, you may have noticed I chose the fields that were going to be included in my list on the right-hand side here. But even if I didn't, the tools in MasterMine do allow you to go back and actually even add a field. If you didn't include it in the report, we're still connected with QuoteWerks here, so we can go and get additional fields. Everything that's in QuoteWerks is there to be included, to be just dragged into the report. So you never have to fear that you're just sort of cut off and have to go back and start over again, or typically you don't. I'm going to do one other example here of just organizing this report. I'm going to sort these descending by the total dollar amount here. Just sort of want to demonstrate that even inside of the display of reports, it's a very easy thing to kind of give yourself control in the moment of what you're looking at. So now we're front range parts that are quoted, descending by the total amount that we have quoted. In this case, breaking it out by closed and open, and I think you probably don't need a lot more explanation there about what you're looking at. So some further interactions with QuoteWerks itself. Laying out a report is actually quite easy and useful. Again, I can just go ahead and save this Excel workbook. I could close it, come back tomorrow. It would open, refresh with current data in it, so it would be actually the old idea of kind of running a report and printing it someplace isn't always necessary, because since anybody who's got access to the report can just simply open it, and it is current on their screen at the moment. It also doesn't, you don't even need to say, go and print me one of these every week. I mean, you can if you want to. In fact, MasterMine even has a print scheduler up here, so you can set it up to automatically open and print every Friday morning at 2 a.m. if you want to. But it is most effective that you just simply open it, and it's whenever the time you open it, it's current. Now we can drill through for greater detail on any of the numbers that are here. That's really important. So not only do we have the sort of summary view of the data that we're working with, but we can actually drill through. So if you double-click on these 60 closed sales of this particular part number, I can double-click on it. That's 60 quantity, but you can see they all sort of add up there. It actually turns out that there are just 5 documents within that. When I double-clicked on it, it created a new sheet. This is kind of similar to experience you probably have with QuickBooks and some other reporting tools, where you can double-click on it for greater detail. What's wonderful about this, though, is it also will pop up these documents right in QuoteWerks. So if I just go and double-click on, let's say, the second one here, it goes to QuoteWerks. You can see that in the QuoteWerks user interface, it actually brings up that document, and then we can do something with it. Now, it may be that we just wanted to see the greater detail. We wanted to actually go to the documents one by one and do something with them, or we wanted to go to that line item and change the cost modifier. Our reason for working with the report might well be that we're wanting to do some sales support process as a sales administrator that gives you obviously the ability to home in on certain data and either fix it in QuoteWerks or modify things along the way, take old quotes maybe that were abandoned and revive them first by doing some marketing with them, and then secondly by maybe doing things like updating the dates on them so that and the pricing if necessary, so that go back and make some value out of past quotes. And on the updating side, just as part of the process of sales management, I can't tell you how many times I've been told by somebody that it's just so much easier to update data across documents if you've got them isolated on an Excel spreadsheet where you can go right down a row and make a bunch of changes, or use Excel formulas to make those changes based on what else is in the row. I had somebody tell me recently, I actually might even have a quote in here about how they were able to make a change across 300 documents that they would have spent a week fixing, and they did it in 10 minutes instead. Really, that's for one-off things, of course, sometimes, but also really as just part of the routine. Sometimes it's just useful to be able to go back and say, all right, we're going to take all of our quotes that are past due, where the document due date is obsolete, and bring those back in maybe not all of them, but do it selectively by sales rep, by region, by product line, and be able to do that in a really flexible sort of pinpoint manner working from Excel. So those are just some examples there. So let's take, let's say we've got our open sales here, and we want to, a lot of things actually, we could take a bunch of old documents and change the document status to closed, maybe kind of a really simple one. But I also, I'd want to point out this functionality can be used to update the cost basis among open quotes. That's giving you one example, but there are thousands where what you really want to do is, if you want your reports to be accurate and you want to kind of have a better sense of what's coming through the pipeline, it's often helpful to be able to do these changes across a lot of different data. So here I'll just take those three, change those three from open to closed. The updater dialog looks like this, where it sort of anticipates, it can tell by what you selected there. Essentially, we're going to update the document header level information. So because this is a status, that's the document header level info. But if there are items in the report, then it could potentially also do the document items. It's going to look up by document number, which is included in our report by default. It's going to update the QuoteWerks field of our choice. It defaulted to the same field that we updated on the screen, but it doesn't need to be that. It could be really any field that's in that table. And finally, it's going to use as its source the column that we highlighted here, the document status field. All of that just kind of automatically populates as default based on what I had selected here, and updating the data on the other side is just a matter of either taking it off test run or leaving that test run on. What test run does is give you this log sheet, and this is just another worksheet inside the same workbook. It shows us the before and after values for that field. We can save this log. We can actually, if we had made the change to the database, this was just a test run, so we just see visually here's what it was and what it would become. So if I like that change, I could from there finalize the change into the database. Or if I had made the changes, I could actually undo them as long as I saved that log sheet. So that gives me a great deal of confidence that first that I'm changing the thing that I want to change, because I've got it completely visually here along the way. But even if I get it wrong, I can back out and undo what I did. There's a lot of different examples that our customers have made use of MasterMine in these kind of ways to sort of interact between Excel and QuoteWerks to get the most out of both of them. I'm going to go back to Excel again. And I really just wanted to kind of point out some examples here of ways of working with the pivot table. Hopefully you see the flexibility of creating that. I'm going to go back to QuoteWerks here just so I can open up one more or a couple more examples of MasterMine reports that I created in advance, and then we'll kind of summarize and wrap this up and take your questions. So we're going to go to the under sales management here. I did want to show you some that have a little bit of graphical presentation. So close ratio reports are really popular. People want to know, of all the quotes that we sent out, what's our close ratio? It's kind of interesting because in this example that I brought up here, I sort of People sometimes don't realize that every individual organization has their own way of calculating a closing ratio. You may want to know just of all the quotes that we did, what percentage of them do we close? So here's a kind of a simple example of that, where you could set up a report that gives you that, maybe allows you to choose, okay, by sales rep, what do their close ratios look like? And you can see I can sort of go from one sales rep to the next and get numbers very simply that way. In this case, I set it up so that we're actually using the spreadsheet to do a calculation of data off the pivot table itself. And here we're just using formulas like anybody who uses Excel knows how to build, and that's very easy. The other thing that I was going to get at here was, a close ratio is a somewhat more complicated thing, especially when you're looking at recently sent out quotes, because do you count a recently sent out quote against your close ratio? If you think you're going to close it, but it's just not resolved yet, sometimes you want to only look at the ones that have actually been resolved. And that's just, I wanted to give you that as an example. One last one. This is a commission report where the commissions can be calculated however you do it, however you want to. You can set it up so that the commissions actually get plugged back into the QuoteWerks, so that sales reps can actually look on their quotes or their sales or orders after they happen and see the commissions calculated there, and then either delight in them there or use them in a report. And then here's a graphical version. This is a live graphical version of this data over here. So if I were to, for example, say, well, we were really interested in not 2018 and 2019, but maybe 2017 also, you can see that making a change here actually updated the chart itself to show the full date range, or likewise home in on just one particular year. That interaction there is sort of the key thing. Say we're looking at this report and let me just rearrange it here quickly into I'm going to clone the worksheet, and I'm going to do this one where I've got the sales reps up here at the top, so because I only want Astrid Peters to be able to see only Astrid's own stuff. But maybe she'll have it broken down. Maybe she's a bad example. Let me take Walter Mitz here. A little bit bigger piece of time, and maybe we'll do closed and so on. The point is, as a report creator, I might sometimes want to create Walter Mitz's own version of this report, but rather than create a bunch of individual reports, I can use this new tool that's in MasterMine here to lock down this filter to just what's currently selected there. So I can put a password on here and duplicate the password so that we know we've got it right. And now it's locked. Now I could just go and do a file, save as, and save this report to Walter's own location on the network. And then as soon as I've done that save, and I'm sure you've all saved an Excel spreadsheet before, as soon as I do that save, I might want to come back here, unlock it, and change to the next person, Paul Grimsby here, lock it down, save that one for him as well. So the idea would be really give you, as a report creator and sharer of reports for other people, the ability to give them the data that they need without automatically making it available to everyone. Okay, so we're going to go back and summarize. So obviously I'm not going to go through this long list, but really wanted to just sort of point out there's a lot of potentially valuable use cases that our existing customers have come up with, just ways. Really it's driven by your own sales process. The thing to do is have a quick conversation with us about, I know I've got information in QuoteWerks that potentially could be useful in supporting our sales process. Here's what our sales process is. Let's figure out how to put those two together. And pretty quickly and pretty dynamically, because the pivot tables are so easy to work with, we can kind of get you to that base point where you can turn your own ideas about what would be helpful to you into an actual, visual, interactive way of making better use of that data. This was a quote that I wanted to share here. used to spend 4 to 6 hours each quarter assembling data for a report, and now she gets it done in 10 minutes. That is so often what we see is people who really have been working manually across Excel and QuoteWerks, and it's the case that is what's happening. Even if that's not part of your design, it's what you didn't set out to get people to do that. That is just the default. People, managers, salespeople, sales support people, marketing people, they all eventually find themselves working with a list in Excel that really is just sort of like a subset out of a database, and they're just not getting the value out of the database that's there. So before I do the final sort of thank you slide here, I do want to thank you all for taking the time to visit with us today. So this is just for those of you who are in attendance with us today. We want to invite you to do a guided test drive in your data. So what we call it, because basically together using screen sharing and MasterMine, we can kind of dig into your QuoteWerks data and really quite quickly expose things that are going to be beneficial for you, either in terms of reporting, in terms of just knowledge about your own business, and so on. So that guided test drive there, that is for new MasterMine for QuoteWerks users. And my suggestions here, let's do a sales funnel analysis. Let's do a forecast of parts quoted so that we know what's coming down the line, and maybe understand better the sort of fulfillment process that's going to need to follow up from the quoting that you've got out there. Or a sales process tracker, that's always a good one to do. Have a good visual that sort of shows the progress through the sales process by sales rep, by team, by region, by product area, whatever. Okay, so thank you all. Thank you very much for joining with us today.